There's been an interesting thing happening. I don't quite know what this means, but I've been noticing in the last few weeks that when I've said things that are overtly disparaging of religion, I've been getting pushback from my audience in ways that I never have before.
Catholicism, let's say, for all its irrationality, was as rational as people can get. If you remove that level of irrationality, that's structural, say, then everything falls apart and people get so irrational, you can't believe it.
My calling, in this case, Catholic dogma, was deemed offensive by some people.
Consider your transformation to something approximating the logos. It means you shine a light on the whole world. Well, there's nothing more exciting to do than that. There's nothing better you can possibly do.
The true horror of religion is that it allows perfectly sane, intelligent people to believe by the billions what only lunatics or imbeciles could believe on their own.
So, I don't define myself as an atheist, I should first say that. I define myself as an anti-theist. Namely, it would be presumptuous of me to say there's no purpose to the universe, because I can't prove that. I can't prove there's no God. I can't say definitively there's no God. What I can say definitively, however, is that I wouldn't want to live in a universe with one.
I was simply saying that this is not a mere matter of speculation, that there's more than a tiny bit of evidence on the table.
But is he saying
evidence for what?
Evidence for a beginning of the universe.
Yes.
Well, we know that. Nobody just...
All right, well, that's what I'm offering in this first argument, is the evidence.
But
why?
what is the
Because nobody
beginning
disputes
doesn't
it.
imply a God.
It does if the first premise is true, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. It logically follows.
Yeah,
that
but it
therefore-
doesn't. But the cause hasn't got to be God.
Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless,
Yes, I know.
spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I think it's a computer.
Well, that wouldn't. Computers are designed by people.
No, this is a self-designing computer.
Timeless.
Timeless.
Well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Why is it time? What's contradictory about it?
A computer has to function. It takes.
Oh no,
time.
this is a special computer.
Yeah, but it has to be logically coherent.
Oh, it's logically coherent.
Yes, you have to be
Oh
logically
no,
coherent.
this
And
computer
besides-
is amazing.
No, besides, it would have to be, as I said, a personal being.
No.
A computer is a physical.
Not this computer.
Object.
Oh
Well, then-
no.
Okay, see, what you're doing is what you're calling a computer is really God. A non-physical, It's just another word if you rob it of all the attributes that make it a computer.
whole world by Islam, including Britain. That is my ambition.
And I thought, all right, another opportunity to take down a Christian. And so I said, David, you realize that book you're reading is horribly corrupt. And he says, well, do care to share? And I said, well, Jesus spoke in Aramaic, right? And then the early church spoke Hebrew, so already whatever they're talking about is a translated version. But then the whole New Testament is written in Greek, so you've got a translation of a translation by the time you get to the New Testament. But not only that, the main Bible, the one that the church used for the longest period of time, was the Vulgate. It was the Latin version. For over 1,000 years they used the Latin version, so you got a translation of a translation of a translation. And then from Latin it went to German, and from German is where it came to English. And that's why you have the ESV, the NIV, the NASV, the who knows what V. You got so many V's, you don't know which one of them is the Word of God. And David said, Nabil, let me tell you something. We have in our possession today over 5,500 Greek New Testament manuscripts with which we can reconstruct the entire New Testament. And if we didn't have any of the Greek New Testament manuscripts, we have over 10,000 Latin New Testament manuscripts. If we didn't have any of them, we have 8,000 Coptic Syriac manuscripts. If we didn't have any of them, we've got 36,000 quotations of the New Testament. All of these by themselves are enough to recreate the entire New Testament. And the people who wrote the New Testament were the disciples, and these people were multilingual. They could understand Aramaic, they could understand Greek, they could hear in one and write in another without losing the message whatsoever. I said, David, you're making this stuff up. Because I have talked to so many Christians and not a single one of them has said that before.
챔피언 프린스 나심 마심 하메드 마이크 플레이가
One of the objections I hear to Christianity all the time is there can't just be one true way to believe. There can't be one true faith. There can't be one true way to God. There just can't be one true way to believe. And here's the problem with that. How do you know that? I mean, that's an assertion, not an argument. How do you know that there's not one true way? The only way to know that there's not one true way to God would be actually if you have the ultimate perspective on truth that you just said nobody's allowed to have.
Now, if you ask me, Nabil, you had a perfect life. You had a family that loves you. You were becoming a doctor. You had a good place in society. Everything was great for you. Was it worth it? Absolutely, it was worth it. I would do it 100 times over again. Today, my mom and dad didn't come to my wedding. Every single time I see a video of a son dancing with his mother at his wedding, I have to think that it was worth it. Every time I see parents lovingly hug their children and say, "We're proud of you," I have to think it was worth it. Because it was worth it. And if I have to die the same kind of death that Christ died in order to proclaim this message of hope to other people who are here, that would be the greatest honor I could ever have.
may get many people saying they're religious, but none of them, in the first world at least, in the developed world, the first approximation, actually believe the doctrines of their faith.
When you say faith is rational and evidence-based, I mean, if that were true, it wouldn't need to be faith, would it? I mean, if there were evidence for it, why would you need to call it faith? You'd say just evidence. And when you said that faith in relativity, in Einstein's theory of relativity, is evidence-based, that of course it is. But the evidence is all important. I mean, Einstein's predictions fit in with observed fact and with a whole body of theory, whereas we only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that?
Yes,
Would you base it? Yes,
plenty of evidence. Let's generalize it. Never mind about my wife. Let's generalize it.
Persuade you?
Well, I'm starting to think nothing would, which in a way goes against the grain, because I've always paid lip service to the view that a scientist should change his mind when evidence is forthcoming.
People say, I can't believe in a God who allows such evil and suffering. Now, by the way, I'm a pastor. I am not a scholar. I'm not an academic. I'm not a person who mainly does thinking. I'm a pastor. So I've walked with plenty of people through horrible suffering. So what I'm saying here, I do not mean to be so cursory. I told you this is the problem with what I'm about to do. But here's the point. When someone says, I can't believe in God because he allows such evil and suffering, what you actually are saying is this. Because I can't think of any good reason why God would allow evil and suffering, therefore there can't be any good reason. Because I can't think of it, he can't possibly have one that I can't think of. See, the only way to walk away from God is to assume there can't be a good reason. And why can't there be a good reason? Because you can't think of it. But why in the world, if there is a God, couldn't he maybe he's got an idea that you don't have?
So the point is that the doctrines of religion are outdated, and that's for good reason. They were created by Bronze Age or Iron Age peasants who didn't even know the earth orbited the sun. So the wisdom in those books is not wisdom at all. And people take the wisdom. In fact, we've actually learned something over the last 20 centuries, and science has taught us how the world works. Now,
The fact that science is omnipotent, and the fact that I can understand why people like you desperately want to believe in God. That is an argument against the existence of God.
But two fallacious arguments put together don't make a sound argument, right?
But do you deny that science cannot account for everything?
Yes, I do deny that science...
So what can't it account for?
Well, had you brought that up in the debate, I had a number of examples that I was going to give. I think there are a good number of things that cannot be scientifically proven, but that we're all rational to accept. Let me list 5. Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths, like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with an appearance of age, are rational beliefs that cannot be scientifically proven. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. You can't show by science whether the Nazi scientists in the camps did anything evil as opposed to the scientists in Western democracies. Aesthetic judgments, number 4, cannot be accessed by the scientific method because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, would be science itself. Science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumptions. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that in order to hold to the theory.
But you're missing the whole...
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, okay.
What was he? That's the question. Jesus Christ, who are you? Who is Jesus?
I testify that Joseph Smith was and is the prophet of this last dispensation. It was he who, through the gift and power of God, translated this holy book.
But he was not defensive, and he looked me right in the eyes. And he was truly complimentary. It wasn't in any way, it didn't seem like empty flattery. He was really kind and nice and sane and looked me in the eyes and talked to me and then gave me this Bible. And I've always said, that I don't respect people who don't proselytize. I don't respect that at all. If you believe that there's a heaven and hell and people could be going to hell or not getting eternal life or whatever, and you think that, well, it's not really worth telling them this because it would make it socially awkward. And atheists who think that people shouldn't proselytize, just leave me alone, keep your religion to yourself. How much do you have to hate somebody to not proselytize? How much do you have to hate somebody to believe that everlasting life is possible and not tell them that? I mean, if I believed, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a truck was coming at you and you didn't believe it, that truck was bearing down on you, there's a certain point where I tackle you. And this is more important than that. And I've always thought that, and I've written about that, and I've thought of it conceptually. This guy was a really good guy. He was polite and honest and sane, and he cared enough about me to proselytize and give me a Bible, which had written in it a little note to me, not very personal, but just, like to show and so on. And then like 5 phone numbers for him and an email address if I wanted to get in touch. Now, I know there's no God, and one polite person living his life right doesn't change that. But I'll tell you, he was a very, very, very good man.
He said, after you left, Vietnam fell. I was among those arrested and accused of working for the CIA. I told them I never worked for the CIA. They said, oh yeah, your English is so good, you had to be working for them. He said, no, I would interpret for guest speakers and work for the Americans, but I never worked for the CIA. He said, they wouldn't believe me, they put me in prison. They said, nobody ever admits working for the CIA, so they put him in prison. He was in a prison camp. They wouldn't allow him to read anything in English, only in Vietnamese and French. Marx and Engels, Vietnamese and French. That's it. Marx and Engels, Vietnamese and French. Finally, he said, Brother Rafi, they pounded into my head that there was no God. And one day I said, okay, I'm going to live as if there is no God. He said, that day they assigned me to clean the latrines. He said, you've never seen a latrine. He said, you thought you saw horrible latrines when you were with me? He said, you've never seen anything like this. He said, you have to tie a cloth around your nose and mouth to clean it. And I had this bucket and mop and I was cleaning it, and I looked into one bucket next to a toilet. And I was about to empty the paper, but I noticed there was one piece of paper in English. He said, I looked around, I just quickly washed it and put it in my pocket. He said, everybody went to sleep that night. I waited, took out that wet piece of paper, and with a flashlight I looked on that piece of paper. On the right it said Romans chapter 8. And I started to read. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and that are called according to his purpose. What shall separate us from the love of God? Shall life or death or this, principalities or powers? He said, I started crying. I said, God, today I woke up in the morning saying I will never pray to you again, and now I'm holding in my hand one verse that I needed more than anything else, that all things can work together for good to them that love God. He said, I got on my knees and begged God for forgiveness. He said, I woke up in the morning and went to the commanding officer and said, do you mind if I clean the latrines again today? He said, I picked up pages from the New Testament every day. The commander had been given a Bible. He used to tear pages out of it, use it as toilet paper, and throw it into the bin. I washed it, put it in my pocket, and had my devotions at night.
with and lost in thought, I would often sit and intentionally reflect on the universe, staring at the stars and trying to fathom how big the cosmos was and how small I was in comparison. And I would tell myself, isn't it incredible that all of this happened by accident, that by some chance, I'm alive and existing. Being an atheist simply means a lack of belief in a God. It's many who hold the materialist, realist worldview, however, that assumes the natural world is all there is. And I'm just not so sure anymore that this is the case. And although I obviously struggle with why bad things do happen, I still cannot help but doubt my atheism. I can't help seeing the world through a focal point of purpose, that my life has meaning, not because I say it does, but because something bigger than myself might be behind it. And where even the question of God, however loosely or redefined, is an open one.